Right, hey guys, how are we doing? Back another video from Annie News. We got cut content videos for ReZero. Yeah, I'm all caught up with ReZero. I thought it was boss, and what I like about this season is that it's still clever. I love the whole season one, season two with the return by death and making it really interesting with the story and the plot and everything, blah blah blah, and then how it changes and everything. But this, it's still being clever with like boss powers and abilities and stuff and how they work. And I thought Regulus is very interesting. From what I can understand, because it's been a few weeks since I watched this episode now, he has this weird thing where he can like share his heart with other people, and as long as that's like that, he can't die. And then there was some sort of like time stoppy thing that he did, like he stopped time and something like that. So, like I said, it's been a while, so let's get an explanation on the power and how Subaru stopped it.
The true nature of Regulus's power is being able to press pause in the middle of a video game.
Right, okay.
This was what Subaru said to Regulus the moment he figured it out, and as accurate as it was to describe it like that, Regulus had no idea what any of it meant. Subaru would then call it Lionheart instead, which, put simply, lets him stop time for his physical body. It was a conclusion that stemmed from the connection between the Archbishop's names and the names of the stars that Subaru knew. Such a fact wasn't something Subaru was a fan of, though, since with the name derived from the stars himself, he had always considered the stars kind of like siblings.
Cool.
So, for the most wretched people he'd met to share that same lineage, well, that to him was the ultimate humiliation.
Yeah, that's gross. I don't want to be involved with you.
It made him furious at whoever decided to name them that way. Now, we already know the word-based paths Subaru followed to figure out Regulus's power, but the steps before were just as important too. With every plan serving as a different means to...
Plan B, balls. Plan B, vitals. Plan W, watery grave. Oh god, armpits. Wasn't the watery grave one the one that
figuring out his
worked?
invincibility? Eventually, Subaru would learn it wasn't invincibility at all. If it was, then him and Reinhardt would have been able to see through it by now. So, it was after that rigorous process of ruling out various possibilities, combined with Amelia's recollection and Subaru's connection to Lionheart, that only one answer would be left to explain all of it. All the patterns Regulus exhibited dictated his powers didn't make him invincible at all. No, what Regulus was doing would be classified as a time stop ability. More specifically, his ability allowed him to stop time for all sorts of objects. This was an answer that seemed so much more obvious the more Subaru thought about it, since when he looked back at the twisted worldview Regulus abided by, the way he lived was clearly a testament to the obscene power gifted to him. Then, with time preventing the change of an object's state, it explained how he could be in water and not get wet, or how he could throw dirt and rocks that would penetrate anything.
Right.
Removing time as a property they were affected by essentially turned them into anomalies in space which could pass through anything.
Right, so he's not like super strong in that. Okay, cool.
So, Subaru would actually go on to describe it as something akin to a vacuum slash ability, since with Regulus effectively being this distortion in space, that would allow him or anything he touches to bypass everything. It didn't matter how strong or durable it was. An object with its time stopped was nothing more than a vacuum to an object with time. It would pass straight through it as if it wasn't even there. To explain this with a practical example we saw in the anime, let's use Krush as our test dummy.
Okay.
Here we saw that Regulus didn't even need dirt. While that is one of the more common projectiles he uses, by simply moving he's affecting the air around him, so say he applies his time stop to some of the air he's displacing, that would make it a projectile no different than the dirt.
Right.
Whether it's with the slash of his arms or even a simple blink of his eyes, if he applies time stop to the air he's displacing, that air will then hold the state it was last in and proceed forward indefinitely. So, where for a normal person waving your arm does nothing, Regulus can stop time for the air his arm displaces, have it keep the state of movement it was frozen in, then that in turn results in an unstoppable, unseeable projectile cutting through everything.
Damn, okay. Wow, this is a good, cool explanation on this. Damn.
The same applies for dirt and rocks, and it was even seen applied to Reinhardt. Now, when it comes to stopping time for his body, the state he was in pre-time stop is the state he'll be in after. That being the case, it doesn't matter how much wear and tear he takes in between, whatever state he initiated it in is the same state he'll come
end
out
up
in after.
Right.
It was truly the ultimate ability in terms of both offense and defense. With its applications seemingly endless, you know it's OP when invincibility is just a mere side effect of it. So, Subaru pinpointing this had for the first time left Regulus shocked, but it didn't last long as his focus quickly shifted to hunting down Subaru. Now that Subaru understood the fundamentals of Regulus's power though, he could easily navigate the chase in a way that actually manipulated Regulus. You see, with Regulus being the novice he was, a simple taunt was all it took to make him engage head-on.
Yeah, like, he has such a short temper. Piss him off and he just goes for it, yeah.
Subaru had cleverly placed himself behind a hole though, so the moment Regulus's footing reached said hole, he would instantly fall without a means to save himself. Had it been a pitfall or some type of covered trap, then Regulus would have just used Time Stop to create a foothold out of it. It's because there was nothing around him other than air though that Regulus would simply fall without being able to stop it. He would have to reach the bottom before he could do anything to make his way out.
Oh.
Subaru would then mock Regulus and flip him off, keeping him occupied as the lesser spirit Amelia gave him continued digging out more holes in the ground. Subaru kept mental marks of where each of them were, but for Regulus, who was totally unfocused, navigating the terrain wasn't so easy anymore. He would be much more cautious than he was before. This in turn allowed Subaru to stall for time as long as he wanted, since he could easily dig as many holes as he needed, and Regulus would remain trapped by what was nothing more than undisguised pitfalls.
Right.
It was clear proof Regulus's experience was lacking. He had likely only ever crushed his enemies in a head-on battle, so when confronted with something a bit more prolonged, this was completely new territory for him. It was such an easy workaround that Subaru almost felt bad for Regulus.
Oh, God.
He felt taking advantage of someone so unskilled was actually making him a worse person. That's actually the reason he wanted Amelia to leave, since with her being such an honest person, Subaru felt this roundabout way of fighting wouldn't suit her. That said, the only weak point in a strategy like this was that the length in which it could go on for depended entirely on Subaru's stamina. Luckily, his bad leg wasn't really hurting, so Subaru knew he could keep going for a while. It was as if it was in peak form right now. A moment later, Regulus would throw a tantrum befitting his persona, destroying the entire ground and every hole along with it. Subaru would mock Regulus again to prevent him from thinking he'd come out with a victory, then create more distance in a classic display of kiting.
Kiting.
As a gamer who knew exactly how to take on powerful bosses like this, Subaru was applying his knowledge of kiting in the best way he could.
That's the first
It
Elder
was the
Scrolls
most
boss,
he'd ever had to
which
use
can be
knowledge from
beaten.
his old world. So, this cycle of mocking and
Isn't it?
kiting
I
would
think it is.
continue endlessly,
I might be wrong.
all while Subaru would avoid both the shelters and Amelia. In fact, there were actually quite a lot of things he was trying to do at once. Not only was he keeping Regulus pinned to one area, but he was also ensuring Amelia had the time she needed, all while avoiding battle in the places where the shelters were. Combine that with trying to keep himself safe too, and what you get is a task that required all his focus. Ultimately, what it all came down to was stalling, and that was the role Subaru committed himself to fulfilling. In the meantime, Amelia would be dealing with the wives, but for him, he needed to avoid this city-destroying calamity. Like, with Regulus going through what was essentially a temper tantrum, should Subaru venture to a part of the city they had not been to?
I'm remembering the heart thing. No, like, if he dies, they all die as well. Don't they? Or is that how it's linked as well? If they... No, I don't know. I think that's what it was. That's why Amelia froze them. So their hearts would stop. So that when he died... Yeah, I think...
Regulus would be sure to level it shortly after. Buildings would crumble and foundations shatter, all in pursuit of him. Subaru would keep running and taunting regardless, all because this was the only way to fight Regulus. It was after about 15 minutes that Subaru would finally wind up here, giving Regulus the chance to gloat again. As it was with every battle he fought before, Regulus knew it was always fated to end up like this. He would then call Subaru greedy for wishing for something beyond his ability, then reaffirm his own value of excessive avarice leading to ultimate tragedy. As the embodiment of greed himself, he truly thought lack of desire was the most precious thing that any person could have. This obviously wasn't the way he himself lived, but he certainly went to great efforts to enforce it onto others. So, as he genuinely pitied Subaru for his grave mistake, he would convey one last time the message that one should be content within themselves. To him, a man's reach should never extend further than his grasp. Regulus would then ask of Amelia's whereabouts, reveal his bride's connections to his authority, then speak of how entrusting them with his heart was the ultimate expression of love for them. This was, as we saw, part of Subaru's bait to get Regulus to monologue, so that in turn would lead to more predictable attacks from him. He would charge forward with a burst of speed not typical to what he displayed before, showing power which stemmed from freezing time on himself. You see, by preventing all physical phenomena from interacting with him, Regulus was free from the forces of gravity, air resistance, and every aspect of the conservation of momentum. This translated to incredible speed and power, but also made it so he could only attack in one direction. Whichever direction he committed to when time was stopped,
So that's
was
where
the
he's
same
going.
direction he would continue until it wasn't.
Right.
So, in the hands of someone more skilled, this would certainly be deadly, but for someone like Regulus, he could barely control it at all. It made dodging his attacks extremely easy.
Because you could just tell where he's
So
going.
much so that Subaru could continue his chase even longer now. Eventually, Subaru would see the pillar of ice forming in the distance, symbolizing the choice he himself knew he'd never be able to make. Even if he knew killing the wives was the only way to kill Regulus, actually doing so wasn't something Subaru felt he could follow through with. So, to see what he could only assume was Amelia doing just that, well, that was something he truly felt would have been unimaginable for her. Now, it was when even that didn't work that, aside from the numerous contradictions Regulus would spew by calling Amelia a mass murderer, Subaru would also review where he might have gone wrong. After entangling so closely with Regulus for the past 12 minutes, he felt he had pretty good insight into his intelligence and vocabulary now. So, it's because of that Subaru knew Regulus didn't have it in him to trick others like the way it seemed. He knew Regulus wasn't capable of bluffing about his powers like that. With the limits of his understanding only extending as far as himself, the understanding of others required to effectively deceive simply wasn't within his capabilities. It's for that reason this whole turn of events was so confusing. Greed's authority should have been figured out for sure now. Turns out there was one wife left, and though the ceremony was never formalized, it was apparent that marriage was just a formality. You see, so long as Regulus considered someone his wife, they would be inducted into his little kingdom regardless of consent. This meant that despite all Regulus had said about her, Amelia was still someone he considered his. And now that all his other wives were gone, Regulus insisted she remain until he found some new wives. To him, it was her responsibility to fill that gap now. When the only option left was for Amelia to die herself, this was a choice Subaru could never make. He could certainly convince himself sacrificing all the other wives was necessary, but never when it came to Amelia. It was a selfish truth Subaru was more than aware of. It's not like that's something that we can fault him for, though, since it was only natural that those closest to him would be the most precious. Just like everyone else, Subaru didn't value all lives equally. Amelia was, however, capable of making that choice herself, but with Subaru determined to prevent her from doing so, the only option left after was defeat. With no other means of changing the situation, Regulus would be the only person left with control here. So, after seeing that victory was his for the taking, Regulus would accept Amelia as his temporary wife, then state his intent to kill Subaru as punishment. Any person who infringed on his rights as much as he did, well, let's just say Regulus wasn't a fan of them.
Yeah, he spoke so highly of himself all the time, didn't he? He just lived in this world of he is better than everybody else. But when it comes down to it, if everyone's able to see through his abilities and that madness, how long has he had these abilities for? Has he had them all his life?
Now, Amelia channeling her mana here was her prepping to end things herself, up until Subaru would reveal his own intentions. Regulus would just stand there and let it happen, since to him victory was 100% certain now. He knew Subaru had no paths left available to him, so this was just an extra show adding to his sense of satisfaction. It was when Subaru unveiled his unseen hand next that a voice without sound could be felt cheering from within. As much as he hated the idea that Betelgeuse was somehow living inside him, there was without a doubt an incomprehensible mixture of emotions not his own. It was as if the power itself was cheering for being awakened. like a deep desire to be wanted was just fulfilled. Subaru knew these emotions weren't his own, so the only other facet which could explain it was the witch factor. He believed it was expressing gratitude for being called to service again. Now, activating it was something he'd done a few times before, but actually controlling it was entirely different. This and navigating Amelia's heart were two things he'd never done before. Combine this with the fact any mistake could prove fatal, and Subaru knew this was a gamble more stacked against him. Either way, he still wanted to see if it could be used to save lives regardless. As a power previously used to take lives, Subaru was now seeing firsthand whether its applications were truly limited to that. That's when Amelia would say she trusts both of them, certainly confusing Subaru as to who else she might have been talking about, but also instilling confidence since she spoke as if she was certain the hand would never harm her. So, one squeeze was all it took for Regulus's heart to be removed, leaving him vulnerable to every attack now. Much of this satisfying sequence was exactly as we saw in the anime, but to give reason to Regulus's begging here, it was simply because he couldn't fathom trying to win without first having a significant advantage. As soon as things started looking a little tough for him, Subaru knew Regulus was the type to give up without first exploring what other options were available to him. That being the case, for him to beg for a 1v1 here, all this was him trying to reclaim some sort of advantage. It was a truly pathetic sight considering he still possessed one of the most powerful abilities in the world. Fast forward to when Reinhardt returned for the cleanup, and Regulus's inner thoughts during his airtime went on much longer than what we saw in the anime. First, he would go into his past, describing the family he detested, then talking about how he killed them. Gaining his witch factor granted him powers he didn't have before, so first he used it to kill his family, then he used it to kill the village that looked at him with contempt, then he used it to kill everyone in the town which forced him to live such a worthless life, then he used it to destroy the country which allowed such towns and villages to exist. It was once all that was done almost a century ago that finally he was able to discover a way of life that best suit him. Fast forward through all that stuff about his wives, and finally we get to the part where he talks about how life was meaningless to him. Romance and love and friendship and trust were all ideals Regulus deemed as pointless. To him, love couldn't save anyone, and the idea of understanding one another was just an illusion. So, with life being this silly balancing act of consideration and compromise, Regulus to the very end truly believed in the logic he abided by. And though the anime has him repeating "it's not my fault," in the novel it's actually him repeating "I'm not wrong." Despite everyone else working to prove him otherwise, Regulus still refused to see things any other way than his own. It was after that Regulus would surprisingly plan his counterattack, since though he seemed rather defeated, his humiliation fueled his motivations to get back at them. This led to a plan which would decimate the city in its entirety, since the moment he would start descending, the dirt in his hand could be used as a projectile to wipe out everything. All he needed to do was cast Lionheart for a brief second, then everything below him would be hit with unstoppable projectiles of mass destruction. Fortunately, Reinhardt was there to ride him like a surfboard, sending him plummeting to the earth like a meteor. The depth at which Regulus ended up wasn't due to Reinhardt's power though, but was rather simply the byproduct of using Lionheart on himself. Remember, stopping time on his body allows him to pass through anything. So, had he kept time frozen for the duration of the entire fall, then Regulus would have plummeted straight through to the bottom of the earth itself. He would have descended to the unknown beyond where even the great waterfall emptied itself. Returning time was certainly an equally dreadful fate too, since meeting the resistance of the ground shattered literally every bone in his body. The only reason he wasn't instantly turned into a puddle was because his limbs were spread out at the moment of his entry. Instead, his body was just a pile of mush now. A mishmash of organs, bones, and blood, all in places where they shouldn't be. Somehow he was still breathing though, and through it all maintained the simple thought of, had I been serious, you wouldn't have stood a chance. It was a mindset backed by the singular goal he'd lived his entire life by. A 100-year resolve to never let anyone pity him. This led to an attempt to return to the surface, where once he was there, he was now committed to killing everyone. No longer would he make the same mistake he made before, since never again would he let anyone look down on him. This was only possible if he could make it back to the surface, though, and that was an arduous crawl only made possible via Lionheart. With that removing the pain for 5 seconds at a time, Regulus could inch his way back to the surface slowly but surely. Yes, his hands were mangled and fingers gone, but even then he still pushed himself forward.
Damn.
It was then that water would enter to finish the job, but even then Regulus would still prolong it with Lionheart. Sure, it did relieve him of pain and any struggles he had while breathing, but when those 5 seconds were up, the fear of death came creeping ever closer. Keeping Lionheart active only increased the risk of dying from heart failure too, so in this moment where one side was drowning
Jesus
and the other his
Christ.
heart stopping, Regulus alternated between the embrace of 2 deaths. It was a fate he refused to accept no matter how near it drew. In the end, Regulus would have one wish only, and that was for Amelia not to feel anything at all for him. You see, he hated the idea of her rejoicing his death and starting her life anew, so his final cry was for her to simply forget him. As the one so involved with her mother's death and benefactor's transformation, Regulus wished her to feel zero fulfillment from his demise. Luckily, that's exactly
Right,
what
what a
happened, since with zero
scumbag.
memory of who he was before, it turns out Regulus left not a mark on her at all. But yeah, that's the end to the Archbishop of Greed. I hope you enjoyed learning more about what this fight
Yeah,
had to
so
offer, and if
interesting.
you want to see more, there's plenty more to come after. Every week will be another ReZero video covering the other fights. So, if you want to see the full extent of the battle for Priestella, then be sure to subscribe to see the video next week. Until then, though, ciao.
Ciao. Love it. So we got a ReZero good content video every week. Something to look forward to check out. That is awesome. That is cool. He mustn't have had anything this season he wants to cover because the beginning after the end doesn't seem to be doing quite well. He did a cool content video on the first episode, which was interesting. Yeah, still cool. Love how he uses stuff, and that understanding his ability, crazy stuff. So yeah, thanks for watching.